So we were just talking about rumination and how the brain processes data and then stores it, but how when we are traumatized, that process is interrupted and halted. And then that obsession of thinking the same thought over and over again is what causes us long-term pain, because the pain still comes about. Our brain doesn't know the difference between what's happening right now and what's happened in the past. We have the same physiological response, right, when we are feeling pain. So you were just telling me on how the brain processes this data and how to stop the rumination process, some ideas there.
Yeah, so I think often, like we talked about before, we get stuck in a way that you can similar to obsessive compulsive disorder, where we start obsessing, right? And it becomes very hard to let go. And the actual pain that follows a thought doesn't actually last very long in the brain. We know that, but because, of course, we go in a loop with the same thought, the pain seems to exceed and extend, right? And last for a very long time. And we find it very hard to then break this obsession that we've obviously got through this addiction. So there's a few different simple ways, just to give a few ideas of how we can try and engage with this. One is obviously through cognition, because our thought is obviously stuck in this loop where we often keep thinking about the abusive person. And often we tend to have this bias we talked about before, where we tend to remember the good parts, right? So we start doubting our own perception and thinking, oh, maybe I made a mistake, maybe it was my fault, blah, 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 which becomes hugely painful. And part of that is, of course, coming back and trusting our own experience again, right? Because when we trust our own experience, the world feels safe and we become calm and regulated, and then rumination stops. When we doubt our perception, and part of gaslighting, what happens for the narcissist, they make us doubt our own perception for exactly this reason. When we can no longer trust our own perception, the whole world feels unsafe, and we start ruminating more and trying to think, why, what happened? Maybe maybe there's a good person, maybe I should go back. So we can break it through cognition, which is why journaling is so good. So writing down the really toxic experiences we had that felt horrible for us, because again, the mind have selective memory. So we tend to remember the good parts of the narcissist and then go in rumination over that cause the pain. So being able to look back and read every time you go into rumination and remind your brain that this was the actual full picture and not the filtered picture that rumination gives you, which is a very filtered picture of the idolization stage where the narcissist was very charming, etc. So it gives you a more full picture where your brain had filtered that out, right? And that again brings you back and can help you break that rumination a bit and trust your own perception again, because you can see it there again and again. So that's why it's important to write it down, to keep track, and knowing we can't trust the brain by itself. It will forget and minimize a lot of the bad experiences. The other part is somatic, of trying to come back into our body, because again, rumination is constantly going back and thinking about the past and thinking about what could have been in the future, right?
Yeah.
So it means that we disengage from the present. And often it's also when we become dysregulated, we don't want to be in our body. So we go to the past or the future. So part of it is being able to come back. And this takes practice. So it can be a simple thing like sitting, pressing your feet into the ground, and maybe putting a hand on your chest and just really slowly breathe in and out, and just focus on your breath. And again, you will go into rumination, focus back on your breath, and with practice, you develop what's called your left prefrontal cortex, which makes it easier and easier to be able to just come back to present moment. And they scanned the brain of people who meditated for 20 years and found they had a much bigger left prefrontal cortex. And also they had the amazing ability in a brain scanner to switch their moods pretty much on command. And rumination is the lack of ability to do that, right? Where we get stuck in a loop. So by developing this of being able to be present, another way to do this in case you feel too dysregulated, and that can be that you can't actually sit and be present with your breath. If you're highly dysregulated, that's not possible. And then you have to look at the nervous system when it's dysregulated and you're ruminating. What does it want? It wants to fight or flight response optimally, right? They want to either get rid of the threat in some way. So use movement, because that's what adrenaline was meant to do. It mobilizes your muscle. It brings blood flow to the bigger muscle groups, right? It does exactly the fact that your brain doesn't work anymore. So you're right, you struggle to regulate. So start moving, put music on and dance, punch a pillow, go for a run. And that actually brings back your mind online again, right? And that can take you out of rumination too. And when you then come home, you might be able to sit down and actually become present with your breath again and keep practicing that if that's, if you're too dysregulated. So those are just a few ways that you can try and deal with rumination.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.